Right there, during my son's 40th birthday party. My wife stood up, raised her glass, and said in front of everyone, "I want a divorce. Tonight." The room went silent. And me, I just smiled. No one knew. I'd been waiting for that moment for months. They thought I was the one being betrayed, but the truth is, I was the one planning to walk away. This story isn't just about loss. It's about a new beginning. But before we go on, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. My name's Edward Grayson. I used to be an architect, a man who spent half his life designing homes for others, yet somehow forgot to build a real one for himself. By my side for 40 years was Margaret, the woman I once believed was my destiny. We met at an architecture exhibit in Boston. I was 30. She was 23, young, beautiful, brilliant, the kind of woman who could light up any room with just a smile. I loved her like a man seeing the sun for the first time. But that light slowly faded. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was me too, caught up chasing work and forgetting the quiet spaces of a marriage. Yet what silenced me most that night during my son's birthday party wasn't the shock of divorce. It was the calm, almost frightening peace in Margaret's eyes when she said it. The party was held in the grand hall on the 34th floor, a celebration my son Lucas Grayson, a well-known tech entrepreneur in New York, had arranged to honor us. "If it weren't for Mom and Dad, I wouldn't be who I am today," he said before handing the mic to his mother. "I never imagined that very moment would be when our family fell apart." Margaret stood there in a dark red dress. Her posture was straight. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "Edward," she said, "all these years, you've lived for your work, for your reputation, but never for anyone. Tonight, I want to live for myself." No laughter, no applause, just the sound of a glass hitting the floor and shattering. Lucas froze. I looked at him, his eyes full of confusion, disbelief. I knew what he was thinking, the press, the guests, the perfect Grayson family image he worked so hard to protect. But I simply placed my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Son, let her finish. Sometimes, collapse is just part of building something new." The room went silent. Margaret turned to me, waiting for a reaction, a fight, a shout, a storm. Instead, I stood up, took the mic, and said slowly, "If this is the day you choose to leave, then I respect that. Maybe we've just lived too long inside the same old house." I bowed to the guests, set the mic down, and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because when those elevator doors closed, the old world closed with them. Outside, New York sparkled, as if celebrating something grand. I stepped onto the sidewalk. The night air carried a mix of wine and exhaust cold, but strangely comforting. For the first time in years, I felt free. I took a cab back to our house on the Upper East Side, the place Margaret and I had lived for over 30 years. The walls still held old photos, the wedding, Venice Lucas's first day at college. But among all those memories, I realized, not one picture showed us truly looking at each other. We were always looking at the camera, pretending to be the couple everyone wanted to see. I sat down, poured a glass of whiskey, opened my old notebook. Inside were months of notes, late-night calls, hotel bills from Chicago, long charity trips that never made sense. I knew. I saw. But I chose not to confront. I chose to wait. Because sometimes, to make an old building collapse, all you need is to pull out the right brick. And that night, Margaret pulled it herself. Lucas called me over and over that evening. I didn't answer. I knew he was terrified, worried the media would explode, that his company's stock might take a hit. But I didn't care about appearances anymore. All I cared about was the truth. Before going to bed, I opened the safe and placed inside a silver envelope that read, "For Lucas, when everything falls apart." I don't know when he'll open it, but I know that when he does, he'll understand. That night, for the first time in many years, I slept well. Not because I was at peace, but because I knew I'd finally begun again. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling, not pain, but a quiet kind of emptiness, the kind that feels almost peaceful. Sunlight slipped through the window, spreading across the beige walls I once chose myself. They used to mean something. Now they were just the remains of a marriage long gone cold. The first thing I did wasn't check my phone or make coffee. I opened the safe and took out an old black notebook filled with hundreds of notes I'd written in secret over the past 6 months. Each page held a piece of the truth, a truth Margaret never knew, or maybe just believed I didn't. I was an architect once. I noticed details. When someone changes, they don't need to say a word. Silence says enough. Margaret started going out more, dressing differently, wearing perfume I'd never smelled before. And the most telling sign, she smiled when she texted. Not the smile of happiness, but the smile of someone living a different life. I remember the first red flag, a Ford $200 charge on our credit card labeled as a charity donation. I called the organization. They said they'd never received a dime from anyone named Margaret Grayson. I didn't confront her. I just wrote it down. 2 weeks later, she flew to Chicago for a charity board meeting. But I got an email from the airline confirming a round-trip ticket for her and a man named Ethan Cole. A stranger, though later I learned he was a family acquaintance, someone I had once introduced to Lucas for investment advice. I didn't get angry. At my age, anger serves no purpose. Instead, I found it interesting, because when someone betrays you, you have 2 choices: revenge or preparation. I chose the latter. 3 months later, I began my plan. Quietly, I removed Margaret's name from all our joint assets. I transferred most of my shares in Grayson and Partners into a trust the Lucas Foundation protected by an irrevocable clause. Every document, every signature, I handled like blueprints for a new life. Margaret didn't notice a thing. She still went out, still smiled, still sent short messages like, "I'll be home late, don't wait up." I waited anyway, not because I hoped she'd change, but because I wanted to see how far she'd go. Then one night she accidentally sent me a text meant for someone else. I can't believe he still hasn't told Lucas. Just as planned. We only need to wait for the old man to sign the sale papers. I sat there in silence. No pain, no shock, just a strange calm. Turns out everything I'd built was something they were quietly planning to dismantle. That night I opened my laptop and wrote a letter never sent, just saved. Margaret, I'll let you have what you want, but the price won't be money. It'll be the emptiness you feel when you realize you've lost the only thing that can't be bought back: trust. From that day on, I started playing my part, the aging husband, forgetful, a little slow. So she'd think she had already won. I'd forget documents, miss meetings, pretend I didn't remember the bank password. I let her feel safe. Because people only slip up when they think no one's watching. I hired an old friend, Daniel, a lawyer I'd worked with years ago, to review everything: the houses, investments, the accounts. When he asked Edward, "Do you want to keep anything for yourself?" I said, "I'm not keeping it for me. I'm keeping it as an example for my son." By then, everything was nearly done. All that was left was to wait for the right moment, and I knew Margaret would be the one to pull the curtain herself. 3 days before Lucas's birthday, I left my phone on the kitchen counter, screen lit. A message from the bank popped up: Grayson and Partners account ownership has been transferred. Margaret saw it. I caught the flicker in her eyes, half worry, half fear. But she didn't ask a word. She just smiled, like someone still convinced she was in control. I let her believe it, because sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is let someone think they've won. The next night, as I walked into the party and saw her in that red dress, I knew this was her peak, the moment she believed she was untouchable. But I also knew everything was already turning. She had no idea that while she was raising her glass to declare her freedom, everything she once tried to take the company, the assets, the riverside home, had already slipped away. She thought she was freeing herself from me. But the truth is, I had quietly freed myself from her long ago. When I walked out of that birthday party, only one thought crossed my mind. Everything is going exactly as planned. Not because I felt triumphant, but because every step had been drawn like an architect's blueprint, and Margaret had just added the final line to the picture she'd painted herself. I didn't go home right away. I stopped at Central Park, sat on my usual wooden bench, watched the children play, listened to the clatter of horse carriages passing by. The city kept moving alive as ever, unaware that just a few miles away, a whole life had quietly collapsed. By the time I got home, it was late. The lights in the living room were still on. Margaret wasn't back yet. I glanced around. Everything was neat, except for one new sheet of paper on the table. Real estate deposit. Hudson Riverside Villa. The buyer's name, Ethan Cole. I smiled. So not only betrayal, but plans to move in with him into the very house I'd bought for our family. What she didn't know was that 2 weeks earlier, that villa had already been transferred to the Grayson Foundation. I'd signed the papers long before she placed her deposit, and the money she invested in that deal was actually the same money Ethan had quietly wired back into his own account. A scam. Within a scam. The next morning I left the house. On the table, I placed my keys and a handwritten note. Don't look for me. All your answers are waiting at the Hudson Riverside house. 3 hours later, Lucas called. His voice trembled. Dad, Mom's at the villa. She says it's urgent, but security won't let her in. The name on the gate says Grayson Foundation. What's going on, Dad? I sighed. Let her calm down first, son. I'll explain everything soon. Not long after Margaret's calls came, one after another. I ignored the first few. On the 5th call, I finally answered. Her voice was shaking, almost shouting through the phone, Edward. What did you do with our assets? Not our assets, Margaret, I said softly. Everything now belongs to your son. You should be proud of that. There was nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. I knew she was staring at the metal plaque gleaming on the Villa Gate Grayson Foundation, scholarship fund for architecture students. That was my old dream, the one she once called a waste of time and money. But I didn't stop there. I'd already sent Lucas a folder full of evidence, secret transactions, transfers, shopping bills, emails where she and Ethan planned to pressure me into selling the company. When Lucas finished reading, he was silent for a full minute. Then he spoke, voice trembling. I can't believe Mom would do that. To you. Don't hate her, I said. Just see her for what she is, a person. When people are afraid of losing freedom, they sometimes lose their conscience, too. The next day, the media began leaking stories about the company transfer and the new foundation. I didn't give a single interview. I let silence speak for me. That evening, Lucas came to see me. He looked exhausted, angry, confused. Dad, are you just going to leave things like this? I looked at him, smiled gently. Son, sometimes winning isn't about fighting back. It's about knowing when to stop. He nodded, though I could see the storm behind his eyes. I let him go see his mother because only he could make her realize what she'd lost. When Lucas arrived at the villa, Margaret was sitting alone on the steps, her eyes vacant. Later she told me when the guard said, "Ma'am, your name isn't on the ownership list," she felt the world crumble around her. She called Ethan, the number was blocked. Checked her accounts empty. Over $180,000 gone. Lucas placed an envelope in front of her. Inside was an old photo, the three of us standing in front of the first building I ever designed. On the back I'd written, "Not everyone can rebuild a house, but everyone can choose not to destroy it." Margaret cried. Lucas said nothing for a long while, then finally murmured, "Dad didn't take revenge, Mom. He just wanted you to understand what he already knew." The story spread fast among friends through the media. Some called it the perfect revenge, but I never saw it that way. To me, justice simply means living with the consequences of your own choices. That night, I stood on the balcony of my small apartment in Brooklyn, watching people pass below. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't sad either, because I knew the worst of the storm had passed, and somewhere ahead, A new dawn was beginning. Not for me, but for what I was finally rebuilding from the ruins. 3 days after the incident at the Riverside Villa, I got a call from Lucas, just before midnight. His voice was tight, shaking. "Dad, Mom's at St. Vincent Hospital. She collapsed outside the house. Low blood pressure, they said." I didn't say a word for a moment. Even though I'd prepared myself for every possible ending, I didn't expect it to come so soon. Sometimes the real collapse doesn't come from losing wealth, but from seeing your reflection and no longer recognizing the person staring back. The next morning, I went to the hospital. When the door to the recovery room opened, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the steady beeping of a heart monitor. Margaret lay there, pale hair disheveled, stripped of all the pride she once wore like armor. Lucas sat beside her, eyes, red hands clasped. He stood when he saw me. "Dad, should you go in?" I nodded. Not to blame her, son, just to end things the right way. I walked up to the bed, looking at the woman who once was my whole world. When she opened her eyes, a flicker of fear crossed her face, then faded into exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "To say goodbye." "If you'll let me," I said quietly. She turned away. "You've won, Edward. Are you happy now?" I shook my head. "No one wins here, Margaret. We just ended up walking in different directions." She gave a faint, broken laugh. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You knew, didn't you, from the beginning?" I nodded slowly, for a long time. "But I didn't want to stop you. Some lessons can only be learned by falling." The room went still. Only the heart monitor filled the silence, counting down to words still unspoken. I sat down, pulled an envelope from my coat pocket. "I wasn't going to give this to you," I said softly. "But maybe now is the right time." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an old photograph, 2 young people in work clothes, standing before the first house we ever built. On the back I had written, "If you're reading this, it means we've forgotten why we began." I once believed that if I built enough houses, we'd never fall apart. But the strongest structures aren't made of brick and stone. They're built on trust. She stared at the photo for a long while, then whispered, her voice breaking, "Did you ever hate me?" "No," I said, looking toward the window. "I only hated myself for not caring enough soon enough. Maybe if I'd listened, if I'd been less rigid, things might have been different." She began to cry. "Ethan fooled me. He disappeared, took everything. I have nothing left, Edward." "You still have the most precious thing," I said gently. "Lucas." Right then the door opened. Lucas stepped in. His eyes were full of conflict, anger, pain, and something softer. He took her hand. "Mom, I'm not angry. But please, stop punishing yourself." Margaret looked at him, then turned back to me, voice trembling. "Can you forgive me?" I was quiet for a long time, then nodded. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I don't want to carry hate for the rest of my life. We're old now, Margaret. Peace is all that's worth keeping. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Maybe for the first time in years, she was truly listening. I set the envelope on the table. "I have to go now. I won't be coming back. But I hope you live well. Lucas still needs his mother." As I reached the door, I heard her voice faint behind me. "Edward, thank you for not making me your enemy." I paused, didn't turn around. I never was anything else but a man who once loved you. Walking down the hospital corridor, the midday sun poured through the glass, glinting off the steel plate that bore her name. I didn't know how she'd live from here. But I believed in that moment she finally understood no one can build happiness on the foundation of betrayal. Lucas walked me to the parking lot. Before we parted, I said quietly, "Son, don't let hatred teach you how to love." I learned that lesson too late. He hugged me tightly, no words, just a nod. As I drove away, I glanced at the hospital in the rearview mirror. The building grew smaller, but my heart felt lighter. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I had simply chosen to move on in peace. 3 months after I left St. Vincent's Hospital, autumn drifted slowly over the streets of Maine. The air here felt different, quiet, salty, and a little cold, as if the wind from the ocean carried a reminder that every storm eventually fades. I rented a small wooden house by the shore in Camden. Every morning I brewed a cup of coffee, opened the window to the silver waves, listened to the gulls, and the creak of the floor beneath my feet. I used to think I'd feel lonely, but truth is, for the first time in years, I felt at peace with myself. The first thing I did here wasn't design a house. It was teaching free lessons for local architecture students. A small group, 8 young faces. They came to learn how to build homes, but ended up asking how to build a life. I told them a house stands strong not because of the materials, but because the builder sees beyond the walls. People are the same. You have to know what you're building for. In their eyes, I saw a light. I once had the light of belief, the kind I lost when I spent too many years trying to prove I was right. Back in New York, Lucas was running the Grayson Foundation. Sometimes he'd call his voice full of excitement. Dad, the foundation sponsored 3 students this year. One of them just got a full scholarship to Europe. I just smiled. That's great, son. Just make sure the foundation isn't only a name. Make it a chance for others. One time Lucas asked me, "Dad, do you regret it? Letting everything end that way?" I thought for a moment. Yes, but not the divorce. I regret spending so many years not realizing that love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go at the right time. I knew Lucas still saw his mother. They talked often, and I was glad for that. Margaret sold the old apartment, moved closer to Lucas, and started volunteering for real this time at a support group for divorced women. Maybe in her own way she was finding herself again, just like I did. One October afternoon I got an envelope with no name. Inside was a handwritten note, her handwriting, "Edward, thank you for not closing the last door between us." It took me a long time to understand that remorse isn't for forgiveness, but for learning how to live differently. M. I sat there looking at that card for a long while. Not sad, not happy, just calm. Forgiveness, I thought, isn't forgetting. It's simply stopping the habit of counting your scars. On my 71st birthday, Lucas hosted a small gathering at the foundation. He asked me to say a few words. I hadn't prepared a speech, just a folded piece of paper with the last note from my old black notebook. I stood there, looked at the young faces in the room and said, "After 30 years as an architect, I've learned one thing: no structure, no matter how strong, can stand if its foundation is wrong. Marriage, career, trust, they're all the same. But the most beautiful thing isn't keeping them perfect. It's having the courage to rebuild from the ruins." The room fell silent. And then I saw Margaret sitting in the back row. She nodded slightly, her eyes calm. Maybe we had completed the circle of our lives, not to return to the start, but to finally understand. Everything was where it needed to be. After the ceremony, Lucas took me to the beach. We stood there watching the sunset turn the water gold. He said quietly, "Dad, I think Mom's really changing." I smiled. "Everyone changes, son. Some change to forget, others to remember." He paused, then asked, "Are you happy?" "Dad," I looked at the waves. "Yes, I am. Because I finally learned that happiness doesn't come from holding on to someone, but from no longer being afraid to let them go." That night back at my little house, I placed Margaret's letter and our old photo on the table. I didn't burn them. I didn't hide them. I just left them there as a piece of memory that didn't need to be closed. Outside the window, the ocean was still singing, and I knew. My life, the one I thought had ended in pieces, had only just begun. Thank you for listening to my story till the very end. If you love stories about family, about feelings, about those raw, honest moments in life, then go ahead. Hit like, share, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week, I'll tell you a new story. Some might be sad, some warm, but all of them real. Thank you for staying with me.